Chapter 4 Coffee Lady. When I arrived at the Rin State Hospital, the medical staff was waiting for me. A woman whisked me away to the hall where I would have the surgery to remove the clot, a thrombectomy. My husband later explained that they made a small incision and went directly into the vein with a tiny camera instrument combination. Traveling up to my brain, those devices then sucked out the clot. The procedure was supposed to take half an hour. Entering the operating theater, I could see that my surgery would be performed by a young doctor who couldn't have been more than 30 years old. He had pleasant features and brown hair. There was another doctor present with him and a nurse on hand too. All I could think about at that moment was how badly I needed to pee, but that would have to wait. The surgeon moved closer to my face and looked me straight in the eyes. "We're going to remove the clot now." I just stared at him, silently. I wanted to say, "Be careful, especially at that brain part." The nurse swabbed my thigh with disinfectant and, scalpel in hand, the doctor made an incision to create an entrance into the vein in my hip. A large overhead monitor displayed the interior view of my vein. Everything was clearly visible to the doctors and, somewhat surprisingly, to me as well. As they worked and talked among themselves, I tried to be as still as possible because I understood that any movement would cause more damage to my brain or my vein. More than an hour passed instead of the 20 or 30 minutes I was told to expect. They only managed to remove a part of the clot. My thinking processes were still intact and questions were racing through my mind. Were they having problems because the doctor was so young or inexperienced? Had he ever been in charge of a procedure like mine? The following day, Remco held a clear glass tube up to the light so I could see it. In the tube was a clot that the surgeon had removed. It was huge. Right after the surgery, the doctor asked me a question. I was silent, unable to answer him. Next, he commanded, "Raise your left hand." Nothing happened. He was more insistent the next time, as he stated firmly, "Raise your left hand." Again, nothing happened. I could clearly understand him, but my body and voice simply would not respond. Shouldn't the removal of most of the clot have solved my issues, allowing me to move and talk right away? That seemed to be what the medical staff were expecting, and I felt like I was letting everyone down. A devastating thought raced across my mind. They must have already been too late. Quietly contemplating that was quite overwhelming. The next morning, I slowly opened my eyes, expecting to be suffering from the effects of a hangover. At least that's what it felt like as I woke up. Wondering if I needed to sit up, I tried to shake off the frightening nightmare I must have had. I expected to see my familiar room, my bed, my husband lying next to me. Bright, shimmering light entered through the windows and bounced off unfamiliar white sheets and a blue curtain that surrounded my bed. With a dull thud in my heart, I knew I was not at home. I had not been dreaming. The events of the previous day had indeed happened. This was a living nightmare, not a sleeping one. Trying to sit up in the bed, I discovered that I couldn't move or lift myself. The entire left side of my body was as heavy as a brick wall and just as unmovable. Slowly, reaching out, I noticed that everywhere I touched felt numb under my fingers. There was a tiny bit of movement in my left leg, but I couldn't make it go up or down or flex my foot. A nurse came into my room while I was poking at my useless limbs. I wanted to ask her how long it usually takes for a stroke patient to be able to walk again. Looking her straight in the face, I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Again and again, I tried to talk with no success. Beginning to feel quite worried, I decided to try and stay calm and asked the doctors when they returned. "I'm going to change your diaper now," the nurse shouted. She talked to me like I was hard of hearing. A diaper? Is she talking to me or the old man lying in the bed next to mine? Oh God, she's talking to me. What was happening, and why couldn't I wake up from this nightmare? I shuddered and allowed her to change my diaper. She never spoke another word to me after that first announcement. Another woman came into the room shortly afterward. She spoke more sweetly. "Hello, Linda. I'm here to give you your breakfast." What a different attitude and energy she had compared to the diaper-changing woman. She told me her name, but I couldn't seem to remember it. She was a young brunette woman in her 40s with a springy walk and happy face. She smiled practically non-stop as she brought our meals, poured coffee, and cleared the trays. She also talked to herself a bit as she tidied up the room. Finally, and most importantly, she took the time to make direct eye contact and speak individually to me. Without the ability to respond, I merely watched and observed, living up to my reputation among family and friends as an analytical person. Her pleasant face and happy demeanor spread good energy all around the room. She served our meals, cleaned up any mess, and then spent valuable time encouraging me, bringing light into the room. Since I couldn't talk or laugh with them, it seemed even more important to analyze the people around me and the events that were unfolding. I was already formulating a strategy. Perhaps this ability to observe and assess might help me recover. As I continued to observe the kind and encouraging coffee lady with the happy face, I knew in my heart that she honestly wanted the best for me. I could feel it without her needing to say it. I could see it in her eyes and in the way she put her hand on my arm. 1 year later, I read a book written by Jill Bolt Taylor called My Stroke of Insight that struck me with its authenticity. She is a neuroscientist who suffered a stroke herself and describes the process of recovery. The author explains that those in contact with people who are ill, traumatized, or in recovery should be responsible for the energy they bring to patients. It was only the second day after my stroke, but I made an important decision right there in the hospital. I would surround myself with kind people who were generous enough to bring me a flow of positive energy. People without any agenda, people who only wanted the best for me so that I could recover. Since I was constrained by my lack of speech, I would need to embrace the art of human observation. I also wanted to be able to learn from others without having to ask questions. Soon, I should be able to determine who are the authentic ones, the ones I would safely allow in. I would learn to tell who those special people were by the relaxed expression on their faces, their smiles, the way they touched me, and the way they treated me, and from the sparkle in their eyes. I had already noticed that the positive kind of people all seem to have that sparkle in their eyes, consistently and without reservation. Chapter 5. The Doctors. The hospital's atmosphere is chaotic almost every day. In my case, the following 12 days were filled with intense activity and emotions. People arrived and departed in waves. My family kept their brave faces firmly in place as they walked into my room. They all encouraged me to sit up, and they spoke to me in a normal way. My husband even made jokes. We all knew that it was vital for me to regain strength and never lose hope. Elle brushed my hair, Madeline made beautiful drawings to hang over my bed, but Martin, my oldest son, looked worried most of the time. He withdrew and became quiet. He was there, but at the same time, not entirely there. This hurt the most. Not because he withdrew himself, but because I was unable to speak any words of comfort to him. I couldn't make a sound. These were the crucial weeks leading up to his final gymnasium exams, which is a sort of Dutch equivalent to prep school. But Martin never had any problems with studying in the past and assured me that he had it all under control. The hospital put me through a lot of tests to assess the damage to my body and brain. At physical therapy, they tested my arms and leg for responsiveness and to learn how much control I still had. Since I couldn't move my left arm, they put it in a blue triangular bandage around my neck. This fabric sling made sure my arm didn't just hang uncontrollably. A speech therapist worked with me too. My goal was to make any type of sound at all, but nothing came out. I was completely mute. She put a mirror in front of me one day. Say ah, she tried. Say ooh. I thought she had run out of ideas and options after over a week, but she surprised me. Walking over to the drawer, she asked, "Do you like music?" Then she pulled something out of the drawer, a speaker. She watched my face to see if it would change. I didn't react to any of the songs she played. Then she tried For Bitter or Worse by Anouk. When she saw my expression change, she asked, "You like Anouk? Let's listen then." I nodded. She was hoping that I could finally make a sound listening to the song. Looking into the mirror, I could barely recognize myself. The entire left side of my face drooped notably. My unwashed hair was greasy, and deep dark shadows had formed under my eyes. They filled with tears as I listened to the song. Who was ever going to want me again? Who would want to be with me when my face was sagging and misshapen? I couldn't walk or talk, and last but not least, I was wearing a diaper. As the emotions rolled over me, I knew I was crying out of self-pity, not stress from the stroke. I'm ashamed to say this, but I was crying over my lost looks. The following weeks in the hospital was even more exhausting for me. More tests were necessary, and lots of people came to visit. I remember the visits from Isabel and Karen the most. Isabel is my sister, and she has been a lawyer in Brussels for many years. She came prepared as always. She brought dice with letters on them, one of those magic drawing boards, and of course some nice shampoo, conditioner, and skin cream. I wanted to thank her for not bringing flowers, since there were already enough of those in my room. Instead, she thoughtfully brought things I could actually put to use. I looked at her and smiled. She smiled back. No words were needed at that moment. I knew she was going to support me in my recovery. When she left and I was alone for a while, I tried playing with the dice. I knew they were letters, but couldn't figure out how they worked. Whenever I was alone for 5 minutes, I would secretly practice with them, but I would get exhausted within a few minutes, forcing me to stop. Karen came to hug me and, as she took my hand, said the sweetest words. She had been married to Remco's uncle, but they were divorced now. She'd gone through a period of burnout from the stress of being a big-shot lawyer and partner at Baker McKenzie, so she knew firsthand how it felt to be in a difficult situation. We bonded, and I don't know how long we just sat there while she just whispered kind words to me. When she left, she looked at me once more and smiled. It was only then I noticed that she had that sparkle in her eyes. My time in the hospital was coming to an end, and we were waiting for the doctors to give us a report. They were going to tell us how I was doing just then, after which they would tell us what we could expect for my future. As we sat in the doctor's waiting room, I could see that Remco was nervous. I was nervous too. As the door opened, I thought to myself, please give me some good news. The doctor who walked in was quite young, in her late 20s at most, and had long, near black hair. Her appearance made me wonder if she was Persian. As she spoke, I could hear that her Dutch was impeccable. Although we had never interacted before, she was familiar to me since I had seen her around the hospital. She sat behind her desk and began to speak, mentioning that I had suffered a very severe stroke. Nobody had told me yet, a major stroke, she had said. Those words echoed in my head while she continued talking. Referring to the thrombectomy procedure performed to get the clot out, she said, "We did everything we could." She continued saying that the stroke killed a lot of nerve cells in my brain's right hemisphere. Then she paused for a moment. "It is only fair to tell you that you will most likely never get out of that wheelchair and talk again." What? She couldn't be referring to me. I continued to breathe slowly, hoping she wasn't talking to me. It felt like I was inside of a movie scene, but I was merely observing the action in the room. I didn't cry at that moment. I was cold, chilled, and silent. My husband began to ask a lot of questions, his face looking desperate. I didn't want to stay in that room. That woman has no idea what she's talking about, I thought. In fact, she has no clue. I started rolling my wheelchair toward the door. Not an easy task with only one working hand. "Are you leaving?" the doctor asked. I nodded. I thought to myself, yes, I have work to do. I was thinking about the magic drawing board my sister had brought me, the one I had secretly been working on. The day after that first confrontation with reality, her family knew we had received a wake-up call. It was time to make plans. My husband and children talked to a rehabilitation center called Clemendal. The center informed them that they had made arrangements for my stay, a stay lasting at least 6 months. I would receive rehab during the week, safely surrounded by nurses, therapists, and physicians. That staff would take care of me, put me to bed, help me shower, and feed me. The goal of those months of therapy was to let me return to a life I could manage. When my husband told me that I would be going to Clemendal the next day, I was happy to get out of the hospital. I'd been there long enough. The typical sounds that I'd go throughout any hospital had kept me awake during the night. I was ready for the next step. While sitting in my hospital room the last day, my children began to gather my things to take with us. Among them was my magic drawing board. Elsa at first and asked, "Did you write my name on here?" She couldn't hide her excitement. I nodded, and she put her arms around me saying, "Yeah." Martin and Madeline rushed over to me as Elle explained, "Mama can write my name." Instantly the children were all hanging on to me. I smiled and they laughed. Then they stopped, looking stunned. "You made your first sound," Martin said. "Really?" I thought about it. Then I succeeded to make an "ah" sound. I could barely believe it. I was no longer silent. They were all laughing and filming at the same time. I cried, and they cried. That was one of the first truly happy moments imprinted in my brain, or what was left of it after the stroke. That felt good. More than good. The words of the young doctor echoed through my memory again. "Most likely, you may never make a sound again." 1 point for me. 999 to go. Chapter 6. The Husband Story. It was Friday, April 8th, 2016, and I had just dropped off our youngest daughter at school. I had walked into the office and was sipping my first coffee when I received a phone call from one of my wife's colleagues at 8:20. "Something is wrong with Linda. Hurry up and come to her office." I jumped up, ran to my car, and arrived at my wife's office 4 minutes later. I walked over to her desk. Linda was leaning to one side, motionless, and her eyes were glazed over, looking at nothing. My immediate instinct was that this was a stroke. I told Mariana to call an ambulance. While we waited, I went online and did a web search to see if there was any immediate actions we could take. Giving her aspirin to thin the blood was not advised due to the possibility of bleeding in the brain. The horror that unfolded from that point is something I still don't feel like writing about. This book is designed to be about hope and strength, so I'll keep it short. It took the hospital 5.5 hours to decide that this was not a TIA but a stroke. Valuable hours were lost due to incompetence and indecisiveness. Irreversible harm had been done to my wife's brain. She was eventually transported to another hospital so they could perform a thrombectomy. But if this had happened just a few hours earlier, a lot less harm would have been done. The next morning, I was sitting by her hospital bed. My wife was awake. She could see me. She couldn't say a word, couldn't even make a noise. She was lying in a hospital gown, and I could see she was wearing a diaper. It was Saturday, so our children had come with me. What was there to say? Only words of support came to mind. I considered it important that we were going to fight this together and focus on the good things. At the time, I truly believed that it might take her half a year to recover at most. How misinformed I was, looking back now. Half of her mouth was numb and drooping. She could not get up, and her left side was completely paralyzed. Nurses were speaking loudly, clearly, and slowly to her, as if she were near deaf and 95 years old. "Mrs. DeVries, can I get you something to drink?" There was my wife, the prettiest woman I had ever seen, a natural Swedish blonde, still in the prime of her life. At only 43 years old, she was raising 3 children, running her own company, and had graduated cum laude with a degree in law from the University of London. She always cared about honesty and values. She lived a healthier life than most. I thought, she is the last person on earth to deserve this. She had been a model in her 20s and used income from modeling to get through those expensive years of college. The youngest child of a single mother family of 10, she ended up 1,000 miles away from her hometown of Stockholm. Now she lived with me in a German town, not far away from the border of my own home country, the Netherlands. In the days after the stroke, we tried speaking with some of the doctors about what was going on. What prognosis could they give her after the stroke? Basically, this is what we were told. She has had a severe stroke. It is too early to tell what permanent damage has been done. She will recover for 3 to 6 months, and realistically, it is safe to say that she will come out of this with permanent damage. We doubt that she is going to be able to get out of a wheelchair. Because she can't make any sound at the moment, she might not be able to speak again. Together with Linda, I went to see one of the assistant doctors. She told us more or less the same thing. Maybe I was not ready to hear this yet, and Linda was not going to accept what she was being told about her future. Tears filled her eyes. I knew what she was thinking. She would beat this. She was the exception to the rule. Although she was crying, she could not yet produce a sound.